Hi everyone, thanks for joining me in week 3 of learning your 2023-2024 All-State Etudes. If you haven't seen weeks 1 and 2, you can find the links below. We're going to be finishing all 3 etudes for week 3. Starting with G major, we're going to start at measure 15 for today. We've covered measures 1 through 14 in the first 2 weeks. And I'm going to start measure 15 at 16th note equals 80, which was the tempo that we did for the first 2 weeks. A couple of things to watch for here. Measure 22, the articulation is unusual, so keep your eye on that. Also in measure 16, keep track of your accidentals, because they can get a little tricky here. But otherwise, no rhythm problems. This is all 30-second notes. But for today, we're going to start by counting 16th notes, and your 16th note is going to be 80. More things to mention here. Make sure that your short notes at measure 16, measure 17, measure 19, those are all very short, even though you're playing at this very slow tempo, so that when you start to go faster, you have the technique of playing those short notes already ingrained in your system. Moving on to the E flat major etude. The section I'm going to go over today is from the pickup to measure 26 all the way to the end of this excerpt, which is at the end of measure 33. This is a little tricky in this section, which I realized when I was practicing this, because you have a lot of high G flats, which means you can't use your B flat thumb key. Remember, your second key needs to be up for G flat, which means that you can't use your B flat thumb key on that note. That's one of the few notes where your B flat thumb key doesn't work. So, for example, at measure 26, you'll have to use another fingering for B flat, because we want to avoid moving your thumb sideways on this key. So you don't want to be here for everything else and then have to slide over for G flat, because that's a very inefficient movement of your thumb. I think all of my students have heard me say this a lot of times. Same thing for the very end, measure 31, you have C flats and B flats next to each other, and that's a B natural and a B flat. So there at 31, I'm using my lever key, which is this arm above your F key for the B flats. You can also use your first finger B flat here. And then same thing at 32, you have C flats and B flats in the same measure, so you don't have time to go to your B flat thumb key. That makes this a little trickier than it would otherwise. Another tricky section is measure 28. Right in your eighth notes for measure 28, you'll notice that beat 2 is a little tricky. The beat is divided into 5. It's a quintuplet with 30-second note quintuplets at the very end. So beat 2 comes on the F, and then the and of beat 2 is going to be between the D flat and the F, right in the middle of those 5 notes. One more thing, when you have these 16th note pickups, like at measure 26 or measure 28, anytime you have these 16th note pickups, you're going to be playing with the 8th note count, so make sure that that is half an 8th note. So if your 8th notes are going like this, your 16th notes are and 1. It's longer than you think it is. So this is Etude number 2 in E flat major with the 8th note at 66. Moving on to Etude number 3. Last time we finished at the first note of measure 11. Today I'm going to pick up from the pickup to measure 10. The last 4 notes before you get to measure 10, where it says appassionato. I'm going to go from there all the way to the end. And I'm starting here so that we can weave together these phrases. We don't have a clear stopping or starting point here. So you want to be able to go fluidly from one section to the next section without having a break where you practiced. This section is difficult. There are a lot of big jumps. For example, the biggest one is measures 15 to measure 16, the low F to the high B flat. Just practice that first, outside the music. Remember to keep your lips open for B flat. If you're finding that the note isn't coming out, that's most of the time that's because you're squeezing your lips so close that the air is not coming through. So if you're finding that you're just missing that note just because the air is not there, open your lips and see what happens. Imagine, well actually there is a crescendo here, so do the crescendo from the F to the B flat to help you bridge that very big gap. Another difficult thing here is measure 15. This is articulated in an unusual way. You can practice this when you're just learning the notes, practice it without an articulation at measure 15. I don't say that very often, but I think it's important here to know what the notes are before you try to add the articulations in. Also, at measure 11, measure 13, when you have this 5-note figure, that we've seen over and over, this little theme in this piece, put a dot on that last note. Even though it's not written in the music, it's assumed that you're going to play it exactly the same as the beginning when you had that with a dot on the 16th note. This is B flat minor, Etude number 3, starting at 4 notes before measure 10. And my tempo is the same as last week, 16th note equals 90. That concludes week 3 of learning your 2023-2024 region etudes. By the end of this week, you should have all of the notes under your fingers at a very slow tempo. And that's all we're looking for this week, is to have an idea of how these etudes go. Remember, you're just starting the process of learning these. Next week, I'll start to address some difficult spots in these etudes, taking one measure at a time of the more difficult areas and breaking them down for you. Thanks for joining me, and see you next week.